All right, and we're live. Thank you, Sam, for joining us today. So today on the pod, I have Sam Marelich joining me. Sam is a tech recruiter for salespeople. Right now, Sam is the founder of Next Venture, based out of New York City, where essentially you help VC-backed startups hire salespeople and grow their sales team. Do I have that right?
That's exactly correct. Yes.
Okay, awesome. And it looks like right before you founded Next Venture, for the 5 years before that, you were at the Collective Search in San Francisco. And it sounds like sort of the similar, same thing, sort of helping recruit salespeople.
That's right. So it's exactly the same sort of thing. It was my first job out of college. I very much fell into technology sales recruiting. I
Hmm.
moved over to the US originally from New Zealand, and I wanted to work in marketing. And no
Hmm.
one wanted to hire me. So I started looking into sales jobs. I think that's common for a lot of salespeople. And the recruiting agency, which was the Collective Search, that I met kind of through this endeavor, ended
Hmm.
up hiring me. I was there for about 5.5 years. I was a partial owner for the last 3 or so years of that.
Hmm.
Um, then I very briefly worked at a bigger recruiting agency. Um, Frankly, I was just a very, very poor culture fit. And after that, I started my own agency. So it's kind of the cliff notes on what I've been doing over the last 7 years.
Yeah, totally. So when you were at the Collective Search, so this sounds like you were trying to get into sales. Basically, being in that environment or ecosystem kind of led you to just getting into recruiting for sales. When you were in that job, were you ever like, "Hey, I'm going to make the jump back over to more like traditional tech sales" at any point, or you're kind of like, "Hey, I think I found my niche here."
Yeah, so I've never actually worked in tech sales. The closest thing you could probably call that is I did briefly do a bit of door-to-door sales for this abomination of a
They
local
usually are.
rewards app back in college that was very, very short-lived. It was frankly a terrible business idea. I learned a lot during those few weeks.
Hmm.
But for me, no. I think I never really wanted to get into tech sales. I enjoy recruiting. I enjoy the sales cycle. I enjoy the conversations that we have. And frankly, I also like running, I think running, once you've run your own business and that sort of thing for any length of time, it's just so difficult to go back to working for someone else.
Hmm.
So unfortunately, I feel like I've kind of capped myself from a career point of view, which is ironic considering I spend a lot of time thinking about people's careers.
Yeah, totally. But you learn a lot from the outside, probably that you wouldn't see if you were on the inside of tech
Absolutely.
sales, right? So I want to touch on, just because I find this super interesting. So you started as, I think your title was candidate development specialist at the Collective Search, and then roughly 2 to 3 years later, you're a managing partner there. How does that work? Is it like a law firm where they approach you at some point and say like, "Hey, you're ready to become a partner here"?
Yeah, I think so. With the Collective Search, a candidate development specialist was essentially our internal name for an SDR.
Hmm.
Then, after about 13 months, I was promoted into a talent partner role. Think of that as an account executive type role.
Hmm.
And then after that, I became a managing partner. It sounds a lot less impressive when I tell you it was a I think at its biggest 7-person firm. We were doing decent revenue,
Hmm.
but it was definitely not. I don't want to overemphasize how big this company was. It was a small business. In terms of recruiting firms and their structure, yes, a lot of recruiting firms, accounting firms, law firms, ad agencies, they're all essentially structured the same way, right? Which is, um, there is often a progression to move up. Um, if you're kind of seen to have that potential. So I would broadly say that yes, that is how a lot of the industry operates.
Totally. And I actually have no idea how that's exactly structured, but like, do you have to buy in to that, or do they like approach you and say, "Hey, you're now going to have this title and this comes with shares of the company" or something like that?
Yeah, so that kind of varies from company to company. I took on a lot of financial responsibility
Hmm.
with that title. Yeah, I would say that was a very unique situation. So it's kind of a fun story to tell over beers, but it's also the sort of story that it's not particularly replicatable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. Okay.
Stumbling over my words here.
Yeah, I'll move on from the collective search here and move on to what you're doing now with Next Venture. So I guess like just in the Spark Notes version of it is like what exactly do you do? What type of companies are you working with, and I guess what's your goal with that recruitment firm?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the companies that I work with, um, essentially venture-backed software startups that sell in the US.
Hmm.
So the key criteria that I look for is this a company that is selling a product for more than $10,000 per year? Because if
Hmm.
you're selling something for less than $10,000 per year, a US-based salesperson almost never makes financial sense. You're better off kind of having a marketing-led approach to
Yep.
to bringing on customers, and then the second thing that I'm always looking for is your total annual recurring revenue over $500,000. And the reason I always look for that is um, often founders will come to people like myself and they'll say, "Hey, we need a salesperson, to grow our team." And really, what that founder is doing, especially if they've got a technical background, is avoiding the difficult work of talking to customers.
Yeah.
And you have to talk to customers. Um, it's one of those things like it's part of the development of a founder. You will often
Hmm.
see they come from a very technical background. They don't necessarily enjoy the sales motion, and then by year 6, year 7, like they're all in, they're rocking and rolling. They get and appreciate the value of salespeople.
Hmm.
Um, but that's one of the reasons that I say, kind of 500K. Look, it's one of those things. It's not super written in stone, but you have to be able to prove that you can bring on customers for yourself. Being 20K in ARR and 300K in ARR are worlds apart. And if you're
Yeah.
at 300, you're not that far off 500. So that's kind of how I think about it. It's that 0 to
Totally.
1.
Yeah, and like if you get, I guess this doesn't happen all that much, right? But let's say you have a company that really is like even pre-revenue or has very little revenue, but they just raised a bunch of money. Are they coming to you and be like, "Hey, we just need to hire out a full sales team," really before they even have like product market fit, or before they have any real revenue?
Yeah, sometimes. And look, there are examples out there that exist of this working,
Hmm.
but it's one of those things. For every example that works, there are 10 examples where it did not work.
Yep.
So, yes, I've talked to those companies. I generally do not like working with them. I
Hmm.
try to avoid them because then they haven't validated the idea. Um, so to me, I think it's just the height of stupidity to hire sales before you're in, before you've got any sort of indicators of interest or levels of revenue.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there like a specific almost like formula you could plug in and be like, this business had, their typical ticket price is 20K. This is like how much they can afford to pay a sales rep and how many deals they need to close like per year and things like that. Is that sort of a discussion in it as well?
That's the whole discussion.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Okay.
in general, like when companies, go to hire their first salesperson, let's say they're at 500,000 in revenue, just for simplicity.
Hmm.
Um, what we're really looking for is what's the deal size, and usually that deal size is 25 to 30, maybe up to 50K.
Hmm.
Now, if a company is doing that, they're probably doing a few $10,000 or even sub $10,000 deals. They might have one or two outliers at $80,000, and then they've got a bunch in the middle, and that's fine.
Hmm.
Um, the thing that you're often looking for is kind of like a mid-market account executive. And the reason you look for a mid-market account executive is an SMB account executive. And the way I think about SMB is that someone at the $10,000, $15,000 in revenue. Um, they often just don't have the level of experience required um, to really like grow with a company.
Hmm.
So, you're often looking at someone who's quite junior, who's doing a lot of figuring it out, and who often needs a lot of hand holding. And that's fine, right? We've all been there. We've all been at that point in our career.
Hmm.
But that's not usually who you want for your first salesperson. And then on the other end, you've got these enterprise salespeople or strategic salespeople. And firstly, they're really expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And then secondly, they will work on very strategic deals where it's, hey, we're not going to know if anything works for 9 months or even a year. And frankly, a lot of these people have not sold anything for 3 or 4 years. They've had 3 or 4 jobs, and they've kind of used the fact that they're on a
Newer.
very long sales
Yeah.
cycle to mask this. So you really need to be very careful about that when you are hiring more senior people. Now, there
Mm-hmm.
is a time and a place for those people. You're not going to close multi-$100,000 deals, multi-million-dollar deals without them.
Mm-hmm.
But usually, when you are an early stage company, that is not the case. Now, there are exceptions, right? I did some work earlier this year with a company that was in a very high value niche, and they were a tiny company, maybe a dozen employees, and they were doing $400,000-$500,000 deals. So there are exceptions to that rule. Everything had been founder-led sales,
Yep.
but they are exceptions, and that is, it's kind of worth keeping in mind.
Yeah, totally. It's like an anomaly. Yeah, that makes sense. So to rewind it a little bit, just talking more about like recruiting and whatnot, right? So it sounds like you sort of fell into like the sales tech startup world, but you've also stayed in it, right? So is there any reason for that? Have you looked at like other worlds of, you could go recruit marketing, or I know there's so many specialties when it comes to recruiting, right? But you sort of found your niche with
Yeah.
sales and startups, right?
Yeah, every single field you can think of, there are recruiters. So it's actually pretty insane. I'm in a recruiting kind of group, and there are recruiters for every single niche. So there
Mm-hmm.
are recruiters for builders, there are recruiters for, container ship captains.
Mm-hmm.
That exists. There are
Yep.
recruiters for international teachers. There are recruiters for software sales. Um, you, you know, I would bet you my bottom dollar there will be recruiters for political lobbyists. If
Yeah.
you name it, there is a recruiter working in that space. Now, I did want to get into technology, so that was the industry I wanted to work in,
Mhm.
and I'd wanted that for years before joining. Um, I very nearly went and got an MBA a few years ago, so I did very seriously consider making a career pivot.
Mhm.
In terms of who I recruit, look, I like dealing with salespeople, so that I think is the biggest thing. I
Yeah.
don't really want to hire engineers. It doesn't interest me all that much.
Yeah. Why do you think that is? Just because you kind of speak their language or you get along with them, or it's just like the
Ex-
personality types?
That's exactly it. I
Yeah.
I think I think I'm a pretty good sales recruiter because I like salespeople. And
Yeah.
that I don't think can be overestimated.
Yeah. Along those lines, do you think, let's say someone has been in technology sales for the last 3 years or 5 years, even 10 years, right? And they're like, yeah, like I'm pretty good at it, but like I just want to try something else. Do you think that there's an easy switch over to recruiting? Or, yeah, I guess what's your thoughts on that?
Um, an easy switch, I wouldn't I wouldn't say it's necessarily an easy switch, but it's done. It's
Yeah.
absolutely done.
Hmm.
Um, and I think the hard thing for most, if you were say 8 years into your software sales career, recruiting in general doesn't have very high base salaries. Even at more senior levels, often actually, I think people don't understand recruiting is quite lucrative, right?
Hmm.
It is easily as lucrative as software sales. At the top end, it can be
Hmm.
lucrative, especially when you get into executive recruiting. So
Yeah.
I would kind of think like strategic account executive, like maps over to executive recruiting quite well in terms of the deal sizes, in terms of who you're speaking with, in terms of how you approach things. I would say I am very much a mid-market level recruiter,
Hmm.
with some enterprise kind of experience. But
Yeah.
I do not recruit CEOs, right?
Hmm.
And there are people out there who recruit CEOs. Um, the I think the key thing there is if you wanted to make this like the step, you just have to mentally know that you were going to take a comp haircut for at least 2 years. You'll probably
Hmm.
make it back over a 5 year time frame, but the core weakness of most salespeople, I think this is most professionals in general, is they cannot look that far out and they do not want to pay that price.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that happens in, like you just mentioned, any industry, right? Like if a software sales rep, you could be an enterprise sales rep. And if you want to go over to medical field, right, you're probably going to you might be able to get, higher than like an entry level role. But yeah, you're not going to match
You
that
are
same
taking a
level.
step back. It would be an anomaly if you made more in that first year. And
Hmm.
I think it's like one of the biggest delusions that you see people make or that people have is that at some point in this undefined future, I will, I will be able to make this pivot and I just don't think it's true. I think it is a
Hmm.
joke
Hmm.
because the main thing that happens as you get older, I don't know how old you are, Nick. I just turned 30 this year.
Hmm.
But
Right behind you.
right, and I'm sure you've seen this with friends around you. Like
Hmm.
when you were 23, your cost of living was significantly lower than it is today.
Hmm.
And so the best time to make those like big pivots are actually when you are young.
Hmm.
And I just think we don't talk enough about that. Like the opportunity cost just becomes so real.
Yeah. Yeah. Trust me, I'm going through it right now.
Right, exactly.
Last week was my last day at Amazon, and it's kind of one of those situations where I'm like, I only have a year left or so in my 30s, or in my 20s here. So it's like once I get past my 30s and whatnot, it's like, oh, like, you have more of like a mortgage, family, all that type of stuff. And yeah, taking even like going out and try to start your own company, I guess it's kind of similar because you're kind of starting from nothing and trying to build up a whole career in a different industry. So yeah, I could definitely see how that's tough.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
almost 2 years into running my own business. And if I compared like the ROI versus staying at a bigger agency,
mhm,
I'm very severely in the red. Now, I think
mhm,
I will come out in the green next year.
mhm,
Um, but that is at least 24 months of being very, very deeply in the red, in terms of how much it's cost me, especially when you put in like the theoretical earnings that
mhm,
that you're up against. And I think like if you're listening to this and you're thinking, hey, at some point I am going to take risks, like I'm just here to challenge you and say, take that risk today if you're serious about it, because it's a habit. And if
mhm.
you do not kind of work on that habit, it's just never going to happen for you. I'm just like increasingly doubtful. Every founder I know who is like a successful, founder, um, they've done this like 3 times. They have
Yeah.
taken big risks multiple times. It's never, oh, I was doing something really safe and very lucrative for 15 years, and then one day I decided. Like that is so, so, so rare.
Yeah.
And you're probably not that person.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I 100% agree. I mean, I'm doing the same math in my head right now, right? It's like, ooh, next year, like this, basically doing this is going to cost me six figures, right? And it's like,
Probably more. Yeah.
yeah, probably more. Absolutely. But like, there's a way bigger payout. Like when you stay in that job, if I stay in that job or I stay in that same career, I know to a like pretty good accuracy of like what my life's going to look like in 5 years, right? Like I can
Mhm.
map out where a promotion might happen, where bonuses might happen. It's like the only way you're going to get past that is if you switch things up drastically, like a new career or starting your own business. So
So
it's
I,
it's
I had a friend, or I have a friend, and he sold his company. So this,
mhm,
I think, was his second or third company that he had started, and he was working for like a large. It wasn't a FANG, but it was like a large technology company, multi-billion-dollar valuation. I'm not sure how much he was making, but I'm guessing he's not a salesperson, right? But my guess is he was probably in like mid six figures, and I'm not talking 200. I'm talking
yeah,
I bet he was closer to 400 or 500 sort of
yep,
thing, right? Especially once you start adding in equity, and because it was a public company, that equity is actually like worth
yeah, yeah,
something
yeah,
today. Um, and we were catching up for beers a few years ago, and he said, I'm going to leave and I'm going to go and start my own business because if I stay, then I can more or less calculate within a very small percentage difference of like what my net worth would be when I'm 50.
hmm,
This guy's probably 35, right?
yeah,
Now, here's the thing. He started another business. It did not succeed.
hmm,
Right?
hmm,
Or like it kind of like meandered along, had a very, very modest exit. He's
Yeah.
since gone on to start another business, and that thing is going to be massive.
Mm-hmm.
I'm telling you now, it is going to be a multi-$100 million business if they don't screw it up, right?
Yeah.
And I think I just respect so much that he had that presence of mind. And, I don't think you can discount that he's got a supportive spouse. And the other key thing there is he's got 10, 12, 13 years of proven risk taking behind him. He has built that habit. He's immigrated from across the world, which is also another, always good sign for that sort of thing. But he has been exercising that muscle for years and years and years. And
Mm-hmm.
I think people often look at that and they miss it. The
Mm-hmm.
other analogy I like to give is you can Google like AmLaw 100 salaries, because I think this is like the best example of it, right? If you are an AmLaw 100 lawyer, so these are like essentially like the lawyers who work on investment banking deals, right? So
Okay.
like the biggest corporate transactions, the biggest corporate litigators, that sort of thing. These are the people that go to Harvard, Yale, Stanford Law, and then they come out, and in their first year, you make about 240K, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like out the gate, and you know exactly how much you're going to make. So if you ever watch the TV series Suits, that is
Mm-hmm.
like that is the kind of law firm that we're talking about here.
Yep.
Now, I always think it's kind of interesting. This is just getting back to the owning your own business point. That if you were that same grad and you started your own, law firm on day one, there is a 1% chance, a 1% chance that you make the same amount as your AmLaw 100, like, kind of classmates.
Mm-hmm.
And then these AmLaw, like, classmates, by about year 8, they're making about $450,000 a year, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, give or take a little bit, but they're in like the mid fours, right? And this is cash.
Mm-hmm.
You see these people in New York all the time, and they're 32, right? That's the reality. And I always think like if you were that law like student who, first year you made 24K,
Mm-hmm.
if you worked as hard as those AmLaw lawyers do, and you put in 80 hours a week for 8 years, I think the odds that you made 450K in year 8 are like
Yeah.
very, very, very achievable, right? And if you didn't, you've probably made like some very significant trade-off where it's like, hey, I work a 9 to 5 and I coach little league for my kids,
Mm-hmm.
like, or whatever. But I think people aren't able to kind of take that long-term great future over that short-term very good future.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think that, if let's say that same grad started their own, right? And by the time they're 32, they're making 450, maybe they're making more because it's their own firm. They also probably have like a better lifestyle. And like
Yep.
there's like, a light at the end of the tunnel. Whereas if you're working at the firm, you're gonna make
Oh,
more every year, right? But like you're
you
gonna
are
be kind of a slave
praying.
to it, right?
You are praying that light at the end of the tunnel is a train. Like those
Yeah.
guys have by far the worst work-life quality of anyone. Like it's horrific.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
But I use
totally.
it as an illustration. I think it's a useful kind of illustration.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, okay, I want to get into a little bit of what you think the current market looks like, because obviously you're sort of in the trenches of, the perfect person to talk to about this. So, what do you see as a difference in not only the tech market, but the tech job market from 2 to 3 years ago till, today, presently, 2023?
Yeah, this is going to be hard to hear for people, but the last, like 3, 4, 5 years were this very, very strong employees market. And that is completely flipped. This is the
Hmm.
worst job market, I think, for technology of the last 20 years.
Hmm.
And the reality is the startup scene is probably going to be 20 to 30% smaller than it was at its peak. So a lot of people are frankly going to be pushed out. Like that is the unfortunate truth.
Hmm.
And what you see on LinkedIn, right? And I'm going to pick on LinkedIn here because I think it is very unhelpful to people who are struggling. Is you have a lot of people saying, well, hey, look at all of these job seekers. And, we need to be gracious because there have been all of these once in a lifetime situations. And I think the thing that people don't recognize is that as an employer in this day and age, you really do have your pick of the bunch. Yes, you could hire someone who has had 5 jobs in the last 3 years, and they'll have good rationale. Hey, there was COVID, and then I changed jobs, and then something else, and then I got laid off. But you're competing with someone who has spent the last 4 years in a company overachieving their quota every single time, is asking for the exact same amount of money as you are, and is frankly more polished. And you were kind of able to skate by that in this employees market, but now it is very strictly like an employer's market. The other thing that we do not talk about is sales compensation has gone up enormously since I started 7 years ago. You used to be able to get a mid-market account executive, like when I started, you could get a mid-market account executive on 130K OTE. Now it's 200. That is a huge increase, right? You used to be able to, on the low end, get an enterprise AE at a 200K OTE. Now it is 250 at a minimum. You've got 300. You've got people asking up to 350, right? So like these numbers have just exploded. Now, the thing that happens when you push a salesperson's OTE up is it's very simple. You just add whatever dollar you give that salesperson, or in this case, you give a salesperson 50 cents of an increase on their base salary, and then you add $4 to the quota.
Yeah.
So if we go from, say, $100,000 base salary, $200,000 OTE, that would be on a $800,000 number. Right? Now we increase the base salary by 25K. We increase the variable compensation by 25K. We now have a 250K OTE, but we've just increased the quota by by 200K to $1 million. Right? So we've seen like sales quotas have gone up a lot. And now we wonder why sales performance has fallen off a cliff. No one wants to address this, but salespeople have become a lot more expensive. And that is it's not the only reason. Look, there is more competition. Like outbound is trickier. There are a whole lot of external factors. But that is one of the ones that we don't really want to talk about. And that's one of the massive headwinds that we are seeing in this market.
Totally. And I mean, there's so many different factors, right? Like what happened with the economy, what happened with the shutdowns, like inflation, all of that plays a key, right? But I think it's so interesting what you mentioned, basically that, all else is the same. If you have to pay more for that same exact sales rep, all you're doing is increasing their quota, but everything else stays the same, right? So it's like you need to perform more than the person did last year, but everything else is the same. The market's still the same, right? You just need to basically pull your weight around, which is hard to do if it's unrealistic quota, right?
Yeah, and it's also one of the things where I probably sound like a bit of an asshole on this. I'm not going to apologize for that. I am not very sympathetic to salespeople crying about it, because the number one question that I get asked when I reach out to people is, what is the OTE? Now, I'm not someone who hides that. I'm always happy to talk about that in the first conversation. I do not hide that at all. But it kind of drives me up the wall when I know that is someone's first line of thinking, right? Like that is the key question. It's not, what am I selling? What's my team? What's my territory? Those are all good questions. And again, I think we should definitely talk about compensation. That's important. But I think if your first line of thinking is, how much money is this company going to offer me, especially when it's a made up number, like on target earnings is a made up number. Your base is a real number. Your quota is a real number.
Uh-oh.
Everything else is completely made up.
You still there?
Yep.
Okay, we're back. Good to go. You froze there for a second.
Oh man, I was like going on a rant.
Yeah, sorry. No, yeah. Yeah, OTE is basically just a made up number, right? That's what you were going on.
That's exactly right. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, sorry, I lost my train of thought there now that we had that freeze there. Okay, let's talk about a little bit moving in a different direction of why basically a sales rep would go to a recruiter rather than just go to the company. I think, there's a lot of obvious reasons here, but any reasons, particular that a salesperson should seek out a recruiter rather than just apply on a job board or apply directly through the website?
Yeah, I think the key thing that salespeople really don't have much insight into is salespeople don't really understand how external recruiters think, and I
Mhm.
don't think they understand how we're incentivized. So I get people that hit me up. I get a few people more or less every day being like, "Hey, can you look at my resume? Hey, blah blah blah." Um, the truth is, like, we are employed by companies to find a very specific profile of a candidate. So it's, hey, say you're a company and you're selling into the HR space
Mhm.
and you want to sell a $25,000 learning and development tool. Now, I can go out using LinkedIn Recruiter and find, I've timed myself on this. It takes me about 5 minutes to find one person. So I can
Mhm.
find about 12 people an hour. Now, if I reach out to people, I've got about a 1 in 4 chance of actually speaking to a candidate. So it takes me an hour to book 3 conversations, especially in this market. Like, it's really not that difficult. And now I do have a lot of experience and I feel like I've really cracked messaging and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
Um, but the truth is, like, as a salesperson, um, we can sometimes work with you, but the best way to think about a recruiter is we are a potential help for you, really, because we don't work for you, we don't charge you anything,
Mhm.
right? Um, but the best way, if you want to have a recruiter doing the work for you, is when you are gainfully employed and getting recruiter messages, take the calls.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the biggest thing, because I do have candidates. I've got candidates who are going to be actively interviewing this week. I've got candidates who were actively interviewing last week. I've got a candidate who's probably going to get a job from this, who I have known for years, right? Some I've known for weeks, some I've known for months, some I've known for years, and um, because I have that pre-existing relationship with them, I'll bring them opportunities. Or they'll say to me, like one candidate who there is a good chance this candidate gets an offer in the next couple of weeks. Now, fantastic background, the last 3 or 4 years, top performer at a single company. It's time for a new opportunity, right?
Mhm.
So, and we had a conversation earlier this year. We had a conversation midway through this year. It really was one of those things. It was a very slow burn.
Mhm.
And I first talked to this person maybe in 2018, right? But they're cutting to the very front of the line.
Yeah.
But it's like a lot of things. You can't build that network the day you need it. You need
Mhm.
it to have been planting seeds beforehand, and you kind of never know what's actually going to work. So this is quite a frustrating answer, I would say, for most people.
Yeah.
But that's the truth. I had another candidate who I put in touch with a potential client, had an interview last week. I'd placed him a few years ago at a company. He did really well there, moved to another company. That company wasn't working out super well. So we had a few conversations, and then I, was able to set up an opportunity there. Um, but that's really the truth of it. Every recruiter who's been in the game for a few years will have a bunch of back pocket candidates. Um, but really, it's actually just as simple as like reply to recruiters
Yeah.
when they reach out to you, and then just maintain that relationship. And it doesn't don't talk to us every week. We're not going to talk to you every week. Hit us up once a year. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
that is a perfectly acceptable cadence.
Yep.
But that would be my recommendation. Fine.
And yes, all right. So I think last time we spoke, you had some stat on the basically odds of a candidate getting through to a company, whether they apply through LinkedIn or the company website or through a recruiter, right?
Yeah. So okay, this is from Mercury, and I want to say this is 2021.
Hmm.
These numbers are actually worse today, if you believe that.
Yeah.
Um, but for Mercury, for every 330 applicants who applied on their website, and I would guess that LinkedIn, Glassdoor, Indeed, all of that are lumped in on this.
Hmm.
Um, they hired one person.
Hmm.
Now, their I think this was their internal team, but this maps kind of well with my numbers and my sense of things. For every conversation that their recruiting team had where they'd reached out to someone, there was a 5% chance, right? And for every person that was an internal referral, there was a 10% chance. So your odds are basically 1 in 10, 1 in 20, 1 in 330.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I would say, like, in this day and age, with like things like LinkedIn, it's probably closer to 1 in 600. Everyone's talking about, and this is kind of a bit of a bugbear of mine, but everyone's talking about things like RepView. Hey, we need to hold companies accountable for quotas. And look, I agree. I think we do. And I'm pleased to see that candidates are finally starting to take heed of this. I feel like I've been beating a dead horse for about 7 years now. But yes, we do need to take quotas very seriously. What these people don't recognize is the companies that have really high performing sales teams are going to want to hire salespeople with really high performing sales numbers. They are not going to want someone who has been 25% to plan in their last 3 roles. A really good example of this, extremely performance-driven company is Samsara. You have probably heard of them. They are definitely on that, like, companies that are hiring, companies with great rep view, blah, blah, blah. I did a lot of hiring for them back in 2016, 2017, maybe early 2018. I think I hired 10 or 11 people on that. And that, as they went from about 330 people to about 500 people. But their whole thing, if you were not above quota, they would not even interview you. And I think, like, we missed that. We missed that point. And I feel like, again, I'm being the bad news guy today. But that's just the truth of it.
Yeah. I mean, it totally is, right? Like, everyone, I think there is like sort of a notion of like, companies need to do everything they can to recruit candidates, but candidates kind of just get a pass, right? It's like, they should be doing everything for us rather than like, hey, you're actually hired to make us money. And if you can't do that, or if someone can do it better, then you don't get a job here, right? Or, you'll get let go pretty quickly. I wonder, I mean, that just like makes me think of a business idea. And I wonder if someone's already tried it, or if RepView has it sort of on their vision. But like, imagine opening it up to see reps like actual quota history, right? Like, this one's been verified by their past employer. I guess there's not exactly an incentive for their past employer to be like, they were doing great, now come recruit them. But that would be pretty interesting if that could be built.
That honestly, it's kind of not needed, because tenure tells you most of the story.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and this is not to say, like, look, if you have missed quota last year, that's not the end of the world, right? Like, it's not an issue if you have like a role that doesn't work out. The issue is when it is a repeated situation, right? Like, it's not, hey, everyone's had a bad year, right? Or a bad quarter, or they've made a decision. I talk about this recruiting agency that I worked at briefly. I deleted it from my LinkedIn because I was there for about 90 days. And I don't see it as being a career impediment for me, because if you looked at my background, I had been at my previous company for 5 years. That shows that A, I'm employable, and B, I can stick around and I can perform, right?
Yeah.
Well enough to keep a job. That is why tenure is such a big thing, and people get really upset when I've seen people get really upset when the tenure question is brought up on LinkedIn. Hey, tenure doesn't kind of predict anything. Actually, no, it really does. And I think, like, it's a lot of short-term versus long-term thinking. For anyone who wants to be an enterprise sales rep, I made people quite mad about this a few months ago, but I said something along the lines of, if you're an enterprise sales rep, you do need to have good tenure, because there's a point at which the solution that you are selling, right? You're selling something to a, like, CISO, right?
Yeah.
Chief, IT security officer at JP Morgan. That guy did not do a coding boot camp in 2021 and then magically get that job. That is someone whose career probably started in 2001, maybe earlier. And if they buy the wrong $3 million solution, there is a very good chance that they don't have that job anymore.
Yeah.
Right? And I think when it comes, like, this doesn't apply at the mid-market level. But there is a threshold at which the buying decisions that people are making based on your recommendation, based on your sales motion, it is actually if I don't get this right, I am getting fired type thing. And so this is where it gets really, it gets tricky. It gets really tricky.
Yeah. Question on that because, luckily so far, knock on wood, I haven't been fired in my career yet. But I've always wondered when people do get fired and then they have to go for a new job. I'm guessing they're not exactly bringing that, putting that on the table when they're having those conversations, right? It's probably some story, right? So I guess my question there is like, can you sniff it out? And I assuming you have before.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, when you're talking to a recruiter, um, I think it's your job to represent yourself as best as possible. It's also our job to represent you as best as possible,
Hmm.
right? I am actually on your side. I might be sounding like a massive douchebag there, but I am on your side. I actually do want to place you at a client,
Hmm.
but also it is very difficult for me to bring on clients. That's the hardest bit of the recruiting game, right?
Hmm.
This is what candidates don't get with the whole give everyone a chance. If I gave everyone a chance, my clients would fire me for wasting their time.
Hmm.
And it's a lot harder for me to find new clients than it is for me to find new candidates. That's
Yep.
the truth of it, right? Um, the whole thing with we've heard every lie in the book. So, I mean, you can try it, but
Yeah.
don't be surprised when we cut it. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. That's
yeah.
interesting. Along with what you just said, that's actually something I did want to ask you about because obviously, being a recruiter, right, your product is basically candidates, right, qualified
Hmm.
candidates. But you have to go sell your service. I mean, you have to play both sides of like selling to actual clients and then almost selling to sales reps on why they should, take this gig or listen, right?
Absolutely.
What is your sales process or funnel for finding these businesses?
In terms of how do I find new
Clients.
businesses,
Yeah.
that's something that I am working out.
Mhm.
I actually don't think, as far as I can tell, within the industry, there is particularly proven methods. One
Mhm.
thing I've kind of observed, and this is just kind of recruiting trivia, is that your average recruiter is more of an account manager than an account executive. And I would put myself into this category as well.
Mhm.
Um, because when you run a recruiting agency, essentially the core thing that you are trading on is your reputation. And the best way to get clients is through referrals.
Mhm.
And so it's really a very long game. And that's why we don't mess around with this sort of stuff, because we don't want to piss off a referral partner.
Mhm.
Most recruiting agencies in the tech space, where they're getting a lot of their business, it's usually through the venture funds.
Mhm.
But those venture funds don't want to, trust someone that they met 10 minutes ago as well. They've got a relationship based business as well.
Yeah.
So this is really very much a relationship business game, um, which makes it very difficult to break into. And
Yeah.
definitely something that I've come to I've known this for a long time, but I've really appreciated it in the last year. Um, Most people who work at recruiting agencies and then go on and start, I've just observed like a lot of people who have worked in bigger recruiting agencies, they'll go and start their own agency. They often actually move back. And I think it's because they didn't realize how much of their business just came through referral, came through their
Yeah.
prior.
That was kind of my idea there. Like when I look at your website, right, and I see logos and stuff like that, I'm like, there's no ways those came through a cold email or a cold call one day, right? And then like a sales process, right? Like I'm sure those are kind of, relationship over time, sort of building connections and then getting to know someone in those businesses and sort of like relationally like that when they need to hire a new role. Would that be correct in saying?
So I've brought on at least one client through cold email,
Okay.
but it's something that I'm personally fine tuning. Um, I was talking to someone, very similar background to me. This person's a technical recruiter, and he's been on we've been in like some various programs across a couple different things, both looking to grow our businesses. And I think he hasn't brought on any new clients. We've both tried a bunch of things, but his whole business is propelled by his existing clients and previous work. And so there definitely is an element of that being the key thing. At my previous company, I had an account and I managed it for 4 years. I hired almost 50 people into that company. So, and I think like it's important to realize this from a candidate point of view, like that is the customer. That's who we are working for. But at the same time, like we do have your best interests in mind. We don't want to feel bad about selling a shitty product. We're like most salespeople, because salespeople don't want to sell a bad product. I think this is one of the common misconceptions that people have about salespeople. I think most salespeople are actually pretty honest, and I think they are good people. That's why I like hiring them. But like the other thing is like, we don't want to place you somewhere and then 6 months later you leave. Because if you leave too quickly, we have to replace you. So we just have to do that work again and we don't get paid for it. And then B, if we have to do that a lot, then the client's going to say, hey, you're not very good at your job. And again, like that disrupts the client relationship. Like the best thing we can do for our continued success as recruiters is have you employed happily and getting promoted, because then they're going to say, hey, Nick's been here a year and a half. He's fantastic. He brought in so much revenue. He did so much better than we thought. We've now got him training up some of our junior reps. Thank you. Can you find us 5 more Nicks? Like that is the best case scenario for everyone involved. And that's very much what we're always aiming for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've realized that, the bigger the company or more management levels there are, there's always someone that's easy to put blame on, right? And I'm guessing the same thing happens with recruiting, right? When someone works out, it's not that the manager didn't train them right or they just weren't the good candidate, right? It was that, the recruiter bought us, someone that wasn't good or up to our standards, right? Because that makes them, it's a scapegoat.
That's a lot of the job. Right. Yeah. And that's, I don't feel bad about it. And I don't feel, you hear, I think like, if we get back to sales reps blaming companies, right? And you'll often see on LinkedIn, you'll see people blast recruiters, right? For being shitty, for misrepresenting the job, for being sloppy, for not following up, for not giving a rejection, whatever it may be. And all of those things are true. They're usually true and they're usually fair, but you'll never see, and it happens as much if not more, candidates being shitty to recruiters, candidates lying, candidates dropping out at the last minute, candidates misrepresenting the situation. All sorts of things happens every single day. Any recruiter, if you said like one sip for every time that's happened to you, that's called dying of alcohol poisoning. Like and we get very attuned to it, right? Like I'm kind of like able to sniff, oh yeah, I think that's going to go bad. And 95% of the time it does, because I've been caught out by it before. That's why I say don't lie to us, because we've heard that lie before. We can kind of like, we can generally model it out. And like the getting angry at recruiters, blaming recruiters, it's fine. That's part of why we get paid. We're paid to be that intermediary. We're paid to be the guy or the girl who gets the blame. But, I think it's one of those things. I think, it's the same thing with this remote work debate. And I think a lot of people are showing their level of kind of like managerial immaturity in that the argument against remote work, I think the strongest argument I can tell against remote work is that it makes management harder. And your average employee will say, well, I don't care. Right? And like, that's fine. That's your right. You don't have to care.
Yeah.
But you can't then go around and cry, oh, why are they bringing us back into the office? It is easier to manage.
Yeah.
And then people will say, well, that's not fair. Like, I'm sorry. Like, in terms of a moral thing, there's actually no moral dimension to it. But like, they in their heads, they just think like, well, hey, this is not advantageous to me,
Mm-hmm.
therefore it is unfair. And I think it's just like a level of kind of, no, like just think about this, like expand your scope just a little bit. You can be angry about it. You can take agency. You can go start your own business. You can go and work somewhere that is remote. But I think you're kind of telling on yourself, especially when it comes to your level of sophistication, if if you can't entertain those kind of perspectives.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. One of the reasons I actually left Amazon is because I was going to have to move back to Seattle. And I
A
had a lot
great
of,
reason. A
yeah,
great reason
but
to leave.
I know you hate Seattle, but
I am not a Seattle fan.
but the bigger thing was actually, I have a lot of friends who are like, oh, that's so unfair. I can't believe that, like, they would make you move or they'd expect you to move. Like, you can definitely do your job and you're so vital there. And like, look, at the end of the day, they sign my check that gets deposited into my bank account, so they can tell me what to do, and I'm fine with that. And actually, I'm more on the side of in-person work. Like, if I
Mhm.
were running a business, I would actually want my employees working in an office. I think that I think like a 3-2 schedule, like a hybrid, can be really good. But I think that having like in-person relationships and things like that, I think it just excels a business more than anyone's really talking about. Like, there's people that I've worked with for 2-3 years, I've never met in person, but there's people that I've worked with for a year and I met them in person 3 times, and I feel like we just automatically have a better relationship, right? And like, I'm willing to go for them, to them for different things, and it's just like the comfort level is definitely there. I don't know. That's my side on the RTO
I'm
thing.
I'm 100% with you. As I grow next venture, especially when the hiring downturn kind of moves and when
Hmm.
it starts to get a bit more positive, I'm gonna be in an office at least 4 days a week.
Yeah.
I I'm not pro remote work. I think like remote work, it makes a lot of sense, especially from a family point of view. And
Hmm.
I think hey, you're a parent, you're in your mid 30s, you want to work remote. I think that is totally fine. I think and I think it's also one of those things where what might be fine for that person is not right for a 23-year-old who is trying to get their career off the ground. I
Hmm.
think like remote work does have its pros. It makes it easier to hire. So
Hmm.
if you're a candidate and you are struggling to get a job and you are only looking remote, yeah, that's
Yeah.
half of your problem. You're probably asking for too much money as well, because you've set your benchmark at 2021. Like,
Hmm.
look, if you can get a job again in 6 weeks, like, disregard everything I say. But if you are 7 months into this job search and nothing is working out for you, it is not the market. Well, the market is trying to tell you something. You are just really not listening.
Hmm.
And the pain's going to continue until you start listening.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. No, I agree there. Okay, I got two questions left for you here. I know we're coming up on the hour here. So, what are the biggest red flags that you would say from both perspectives, right? So, if you're a company hiring salespeople, what's the biggest red flags to look for in those salespeople? And then vice versa, if you're a sales rep going to a company, I know we talked about rep view and you can check quota attainment, but if we're being honest, they don't have every company, and the data is only reported by employees that are willing to report, right? So, and I love rep view, by the way, they've been very nice to the follow up. But
I
there,
think they're doing a good service. I think you
yeah,
just have to fully kind of understand their incentives as well.
yeah, no, absolutely. But what are like the common red flags you see from both sides?
Yeah, I think the key things I would say for companies are a just if things don't add up, right?
Hmm.
And like I'll give you a couple of examples. If someone says that they've got really good quota attainment, but they've got a lot of short stays, like tenure really is the big one. Like
Hmm.
I think if you could just basically boil things down into tenure is where most of the red flags kind of come
Hmm.
in. Um, so that would be my like 80-20 rule. Now there
Yeah,
are other red flags. It's if someone appears weird, like if they're doing stuff that throws you off, that's probably that's probably something to keep in mind.
yeah.
Um, I think there's probably more juice on the employee side. So if we're going to talk explicitly about joining a startup, the key thing that I would ask is this company solving a real problem? Right. And I
Mm-hmm.
think like, let's talk about AI. Hey, this is a product that helps people summarize meeting notes. Okay. I was talking to this great CRO. I'll find this text for you, and
Yep.
I'm gonna read it. I'm gonna read it out because I think this is gonna be instructive.
Let's do it.
This guy is fantastic. One of the best CROs I know. He took a company from $0 to $30 million in annual recurring revenue.
Mm-hmm.
Phenomenal. But he said to me, I see you're connected with a company. They're looking for a head of sales. What are your thoughts on the company? And this company is let me just bring this up. They are sorry, we're just waiting for it to load.
Yeah, you're
Your
good.
personal search engine at work. AI-powered search for all your apps. Never miss what matters. Right? It's a productivity tool. And
Yeah.
I said to this guy, I was like, are you put yourself back into your old job? Are you okay spending $30,000 on this solution?
Mm-hmm.
He's like, no.
Yeah.
And that's exactly it. Right?
Yeah.
Are you selling something that is a need to have? Or are you selling something that is a nice to have? And you want to
Mm-hmm.
sell something that is a need to have. Something
Mm-hmm.
that really does move the needle. I'll give you an example, right? With recruiting. There are a million apps that have come out with the idea of disrupting recruiting, right? And almost all of them, they are a case of founders utilizing a technology and then looking for a use case. But there is actually no real use case here, right?
Yeah.
The killer app for recruiting is LinkedIn. Because if you think about LinkedIn, it is a self-updating database. That is
Mm-hmm.
the most incredible product. LinkedIn, like everyone at LinkedIn, as far as I can tell, sleeps all day, right? Like they don't do a huge amount. But the
Yeah.
product is so good, it doesn't actually matter,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, but everything else, because a lot of what people will say was, do you want to find more people faster? No, not really. Like, LinkedIn's already pretty good,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's this self-updating database. Like, people go in and they update things without you needing to. Magic. The only other recruiting product that's close is a product called Gem. And what Gem is it's like your Outreach, Salesloft, whatever, but it will find people's personal email addresses. It's very
Hmm.
useful if you're recruiting. But everything else, it's just a nice to have, right?
Yeah.
Like every single other product on the market when it comes to recruiting is a nice to have. And
Yep.
I think you need to think like that when you are thinking about your next product. Like, is this something that is going to save this company so much money? Is this going to save them so much time? Is this going to allow them to make people unemployed? Like,
Mm-hmm.
those are basically what you need to be able to work out. Is this legally going to be required in the next 12 months? That,
Mm-hmm.
but outside of that, you're probably selling something that's a nice to have. And I'm just going to follow up with a point because I've seen a lot of startups lead with this. If you're a big company, say you're John Deere, say you're, I don't know, IBM, General Motors, General Electric,
Yeah.
Apple. All of these companies have I don't know, multi-million, let's just pretend $30 million budget every year for trying a whole lot of products at $50,000 a pop, right? And so you'll see, oh, well, hey, like every blockchain is like the best example of this.
Mm-hmm.
Every single big company had some sort of like blockchain or Web3 application. And everyone kind of used that as like, oh, look, the whole world is going on blockchain. Coca-Cola have a blockchain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Coca-Cola spent $50,000 so that they could get a line in the New York Times about how they're using the blockchain. But they're going to spend, I don't know, 20 million, 10 million, like 5 million, a whole lot of money on a whole lot of these solutions. But that's not really where they're spending the money.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's just them finding money under between the couch
Yeah.
cushions.
It's a rounding
And
error. Yeah.
exactly, so if you want to make the real money, you have to find a product that people actually want to buy as
Yeah.
opposed to just a theoretical, maybe we buy it, but it's kind of just spending a bit of our bare money on something that seems novel.
Totally. It's the whole vitamin versus painkiller thing, right?
Exactly.
That you need to be selling a painkiller. And I love that point, and I 100% agree with you there. I also think it's very hard for people that are newer in their career, or at least it was for me, right? Because when you're newer in your career and you don't really understand corporate or the business landscape or how businesses really operate at a core, right? You talk to any one of these companies that are doing, 5 million a year, 10 million a year, and they're like, we're revolutionizing the way we do HR, right? And it's like, well, you just did like this one feature a little bit better, and you got like a couple of your friends to buy it, because your CEO is plugged in with this person, right? It's hard to understand and take like a 10,000-foot view and say, does this solution really make sense? And I think if you're a 24-year-old, 23-year-old, you don't really know. It's impossible to know. I wouldn't have known. But it's so crucial. And if you get plugged in with the right company, it can literally make your entire career if you get, if you're riding a wave rather than, trying to create something in a market that doesn't want it.
I agree. I think there are a few pieces of just like nuance that I would add to that.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is, if you are trying to break into a sales career,
Mm-hmm.
an SDR gig, being the first SDR, is usually a gig with very, very limited upside. Regardless of where you go and work as an SDR, you are not going to get rich through your equity. I don't care if you have $1 billion exit. You might, if all of the stars aligned and your company has $1 billion exit, you might make $100K out of that. I doubt you would make that much, but that is like probably one of the best case scenarios that you'll see, right? So the odds of you making even let's be honest, by the time you are 30 and making 240 grand a year or whatever, like, it's a nice chunk of change. I'm not going to say it's not, but it is not this life-changing sum. So when you are in an SDR gig, like, it's a good time to learn about equity, to start to understand it, because it is going to become a much bigger part of your career as you go down the line. But today, it doesn't really matter all that much. Now, look, if you can't break into a big tech company, then yeah, you might go and join a startup as an SDR, as a way in, right? And so that's us playing a different game, and there's nothing wrong with that. The second thing there is, when you go to that 30,000-foot view, I agree with you, right? It is important to take a bit of a zoomed out view of things and try and understand things. But it's not the be all and end all. And I'll give you an example here. Snowflake, right? We've all heard of Snowflake. Good company?
Yeah, I would say so.
Right. Everyone was saying that, 2021. Hottest company. Massive IPO, right? So from an investor's point of view, it was amazing. From an executive point of view, it was very good. From a customer point of view, people were pretty happy with it. Now, from a rep point of view, it was actually carnage. They were hiring a lot of people. They were chopping up territories. There were a lot of people that weren't loving life, right? And so one of the key things that I think about is, when you talk to people, right, and the people that you will often hear opinions from when it comes to technology companies, is there are often venture capitalists, there are founders and CEOs, and then there are salespeople. And they are all going to have very different opinions, and they are all going to have very different opinions on what makes something good and what makes something bad. And now, this is not to say that this is dishonest or bad or anything like that, but it is just simply where they sit in the company, right? And as a salesperson, like, you need to take the salesperson's point of view. And actually, there are plenty of startups that are going to return venture investors zero that have been fantastic for salespeople. I feel like it's not a nice thing to say, but it's true. And there are plenty of venture investments that are going to turn out really well. Salespeople aren't going to see much out of it. So it's important to remember that. And it's the same thing when you're talking to a founder. A founder's probably got 1,000 times more equity than you. And I don't think people mind. We understand that there are trade-offs and that sort of thing. I don't think most people are too envious about that sort of thing. But again, it's just important to know. They have an opinion. They have a lot more equity than you. Your compensation as a salesperson is very much loaded into this year and next year. And that's fine. And so I think it's just important to recognize like incentive structures and think about where you sit and what's going to make sense for you. And then doing what suits, what fits your best interest, both in the short term, the medium term, and in the long term.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of a lot of the art here. And the thing is, like, this is tricky because there aren't these simple answers. There's a lot of complexity here.
There's so much. There's so much.
It's part
Yeah.
of why it's lucrative. It's part of why it's fun. That's why I like doing this. It's interesting.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up actually before. I was reading through your blog post before this and I saw your note on an investor versus CEO versus salesperson, right? And yeah, you could have the same exact company. It could have totally different outcomes for each of them, right? And sometimes investors make back their money, but the CEO's diluted so much that they don't even come out with as much as some other people in the company, right? It's just, yeah, it can end up different for everybody, with the same outcome for the company as a whole. But like you were mentioning with Snowflake, right? I think there were a lot of enterprise sales reps that came out of that situation, millionaires that may not have been before. But like you were mentioning with SDRs, I'm sure there's SDRs that joined while they were blowing up and everything seemed great and they were all over the news. And life 2 years later isn't the same, right? And the stock I think is down big time as well, if I remember. But yeah,
a general rule, and I think it is, if you take away only one thing from this podcast, just by the time it's being promoted to you, the peak kind of opportunity has passed, right? I saw a thing, and it was talking about Bill Gates has made something like $500 billion, like lifetime from Microsoft.
yeah.
Steve Ballmer, who, didn't have the most glorious tenure, actually, from a sales point of view, one to study because he by far of all of the Microsoft employees finessed like the biggest equity stake to an unbelievable degree. But Steve Ballmer, something like lifetime, made something like $100 billion out of Microsoft as a non-founding employee. What is it, Satya Nadella? I think that's his name.
Microsoft.
Yeah, the CEO. Phenomenal run, hugely successful tenure. Made $1 billion.
Yeah.
Now, no one's going to say that $1 billion is a bad outcome, but Bill Gates made 500x that.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to think about these things. Actually, one of the biggest ones, if you are listening to this and you are thinking about being a VP of sales, there's this thing you need to really start to understand, venture financing. And there are some books that you can read. There's one by Brad Feld. I've forgotten the name. There's another one by Scott Cooper, who's one of the partners at Andreessen Horowitz, called Secrets of Sand Hill Road. But you need to start going into this. You need to start understanding the financial mechanisms. There is one of these, one of the best VPs of sales walked me through two things that he did. He made more than $1 million from a company exit, and he made a lot of cash while he was at this company. As a VP of sales, he was in on all board meetings, the whole board meeting. So he didn't have any rights to vote or anything like that, but he wasn't the salesperson who was trotted in for the sales numbers and then missed the context of the company. I thought that was really smart. The second thing that he did was there is, and I'm blanking on what it is called, but when you sell a company, right? Say your company is acquired, there is your average employee. Say we are 25 months into a 48-month vesting schedule, and we're just going to say you get one share per month for simplicity, right? You've passed your 1 year cliff. You have now got 25 shares in the company. Next month, you get another share. Now, it's called single trigger versus double trigger equity vesting. Now, this doesn't usually happen at the rep level. I don't think it makes sense to negotiate for this. But at the executive level, it does. There is a provision, and this usually covers most executives. When the company gets acquired, all of the shares from the rest of your vesting period vest that day.
Okay.
So you went from 25 shares to 48. And now if you're a rep, as I said, this doesn't usually apply to you. You are much better off focusing on optimizing your quota attainment. You are much better off having an aggressive comp plan where you get paid really well for overachieving and that sort of thing. But once you kind of jump, I would say like director and above, it really does start to become about the equity.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. Well, just like everything we've talked about today, right? Equity only matters if there's a payoff one day, right? Like, most equity actually won't matter, but when it does, it really does, right? And that's kind of the bet you're taking.
Exactly. And like, I think it's also one of those things like, I don't think it makes sense to optimize for it super early in your career, frankly, just because it doesn't really, like if we think about these big payoffs, right? Like, what are the big companies that we are seeing where you could have joined early and made a life-changing amount? Databricks, like that's not a new company. Stripe, like if you join straight out of school at Stripe, you joined maybe in 2009, 2010. So you're 13 years into your career. I graduated in 2015, like 2016, like I started my career in 2016. I'm 30. So like if you started your career in Stripe and you were super early, you were probably closer to knocking on 40. And you caught like the biggest break.
Yeah.
Like, I just think it's worth thinking about that. And so, look, once you start getting into the director level, yes, think about this. But like, for most people, you would have been much better off optimizing for cash in hand.
Yeah, totally. I mean, yeah, if you join Stripe, you're sitting pretty right now. I think it's if you ever listen to the My First Million podcast, I think Sean Purry says he interviewed for a sales role at Stripe right out of college. I don't think he got it, or he botched the interview or something, if he didn't take it.
I've heard the story.
Yeah, if he would have stuck it out there today, he would have his stock would have been worth like 20 mil plus, which is tough to think about. But he's done all right. Not doing that route.
I think it's like one of those things. I think you have to say, did it really? Would he have made more? I don't know what his exit value is like, but I don't know if he might have dodged a bullet by not joining. Do you know what I mean? In terms of the success that he's seen after. I will give you one example. This is why I don't like using cherry-picked examples too much. At my previous company, someone there placed a first sales rep. This guy got 1% of a company. Today, that company is worth $7 billion.
Wow.
Even after, so $70 million. Even if we say diluted down 75%, there's still about $18 million, right?
Yeah.
In equity. Now, the thing is people will hear that and they'll think, I can do that. But actually, that is a 1 in 10,000 chance. Also, that guy was the number one rep, or if not number one rep, he was a very, very good rep at a very technical company for a long time. He was probably 10 years into his career. He wasn't on the come up. Like, this was not a guy on the come up. Do you know what I mean? And like, I think like that's the key thing here as well. Is like, this was someone who was doing really well and was going to do well regardless.
Yeah.
But I think like that's a good example of someone who could have taken he could afford to take the risk. He took the risk and it paid off. So far it appears to have paid off. That company is not public yet. So, we could be wrong. But I think in general, like, you have to lengthen out these horizons enormously.
Yeah.
Everyone who made money at Okta was there in 2009. That's a long time ago.
And they were all like top reps, right? Like, you don't have some mediocre rep that's like, barely scraping by and somehow they pulled their way out and made 10 million in stock, right? Like, there's way more to it than just kind of being in the right place at the right time. But that is a huge key of it as well.
Yep. And like being in the right place at the right time. It's, I mean, I can give you an example. Got this rep. This is someone I mentioned earlier. They're interviewing with a client. I think this client is going to be massive. I think there is a very decent exit opportunity here. And this person is going to join likely as an enterprise or strategic account executive at a company that is very, very early stage, but has been doing really well. Now, this person, probably about 30, very good track record so far. But 8 years into the career, and I would say like any equity outcome from this opportunity, probably 10 years down the line. And there are
Yeah.
so many question marks. I think the final thought on this topic would be, when it comes to, using data and thinking about the odds and that sort of thing, it's tricky because you don't want to overlook to some degree, because every startup is going to look quite frail, especially when it starts. So it's
Mm-hmm.
very easy to say, well, that company is not going to go anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And they might not. But I think you kind of have to have a little bit of the delusion, the confidence, call it what you want, that it is going to go somewhere, and that you can be someone who can like push that inflection curve up. Like, I think you have to, and if you don't have that within you, it probably doesn't make sense to go and do super early stage stuff. Go and join
Yeah.
somewhere a bit safer and a bit bigger and a bit more figured out. There's nothing wrong with that.
Mm-hmm. Which for a lot of people that makes sense, right? For a lot of people, especially earlier in their career where they don't really know anything and they need training, yeah, it 100% makes sense.
If you're like, nah, that ain't me, then you weren't listening anyway. So it doesn't, right? I think that's the thing about most people who are quite entrepreneurial, like,
Mm-hmm.
like as the Kanye West "Can't Tell Me Nothing" song,
Yeah.
playing in the background.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I could keep talking about this for a while, but I'll move on to the last question here that I do want to leave it with. So, let's just pretend here for a second that you're a sales rep that just got laid off this year. You're trying to find a new job ASAP, right? Like you're not trying to take any time off. You're like, hey, I need to get back into it now. Maybe I have bills to pay, something like that. And let's say, just for the sake of your experience, that it's someone in the tech scene and they want to get in it. Maybe a startup, maybe a somewhat more established company, but definitely like a high technical company. What's your first moves after that layoff?
First thing is, make yourself as marketable as possible. Put your numbers up on LinkedIn. If you were not number one in the company, if you were not like above quota, put where you were at in the company, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like, if you were 2 out of 12 and you didn't hit your number, it's a lot better than being 64% to plan, right?
Yeah.
I was working with a woman who, her quota numbers were pretty bad. Like, they were
Mm-hmm.
really low. But I was, walking her profile through with a client, and where things looked good is, she, like, yes, her quota numbers were bad, but she was number one on the team. She had an entrepreneurial background and very scrappy. Like, could be the right person for an
Mm-hmm.
early stage company. Just a case of like the offer not resonating with the market right now. So
Mm-hmm.
make yourself as marketable as possible. Professional LinkedIn profile. Make your resume a PDF. Things we want to see. What's your deal size? What's your sales performance like? If you've got any big impressive logos, talk about them. Talk about your achievements. And don't give us like BS, I help manage cross-functional meetings. That just tells me you didn't do anything at your job, right? If
Mm-hmm.
you say, hey, I bought on, ExxonMobil, $120,000 contract renewal, got it up to 160. Great. Now I've got a selling point that I can bring, right? So if you are currently employed, put a reminder on your calendar, end of the month, every single month. What did I do this month? What are my numbers? And get this off your employer's system. Like, put it on your own system, because the day you need it is the day you won't have access to those systems, and you'll be thanking yourself for writing this down. It takes 2 minutes a month.
Mm-hmm.
You owe it to yourself. But put all of this stuff on LinkedIn. I
Mm-hmm.
think, have a professional headshot. You can do this at home. Phone cameras are pretty good these days.
Yep.
I think that those would be the first things. If you're between jobs, go through your network and start reaching out to people. Do some research, like, who have you connected with,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then I think the final thing is, like, if you are applying to jobs, then stand out. I would be cold emailing like someone more senior, that possibly the person posting, but like, if you are applying to a startup, CEO, the CRO, the VP of sales, someone like that, cold call them. Like, get their phone number and cold call them. It is like I did this. I don't really believe in job ads, right? But except for the SDRs, like job ads make sense. So I was running these job ads. I got 850 applicants in 4 days, right? If
Yeah.
I spent 30 seconds looking at each profile, I would have spent a whole day looking at profiles. And then I don't actually want to speak to 100 people. That's way too many. I need to hire 2. Of all of that, most people sent nothing. And then a lot of people sent templated stuff, like the stuff that LinkedIn suggests you write. Don't use that because everyone else is using that and I'm ignoring it.
Yep.
And then I think the other, honestly, there's a pretty good chance it just doesn't work. I got a lot of those messages. I didn't actually look at any of them because I was like, I'm just going to go through these profiles one at a time and kind of like review them on their own merits because I had so many, right?
Yeah.
I think like that's what people don't get is like in 2023, like we are just trying to cull the herd down. I want to see 40 profiles and I want to pick 6 people to speak to, like maybe 8, because then I can send 4 to the client and they'll hire 1. I do not want to see 800 profiles. This is what, getting back to the tech kind of question, like this is what all of these recruiting tech companies get wrong, is I don't actually want to see more candidates. Like my clients want to see 5 great candidates, not 55. It's too much to do.
Yep.
So I would be going through my network and asking people. And then if I have to reach out, I would be picking up the phone, I would be cold emailing, and I would be avoiding templates.
Yeah. Yep.
And I think the final thing is like this is like a personal view. I think people get, one of 2 ways. I would not beg on LinkedIn. I think it's super undignified. And I think it sets you up. Like I think it sets you up, frankly, terribly for the next couple of years because you got that job as a beggar. I just don't think I don't think it correlates well with being a good salesperson.
Can you define that a little bit more? Like
Nick,
what does that look like?
Job. I'm like you see these posts and it's hey
you need like
in a
public
week from
posts.
now I can't pay my rent or whatever. Like look, I get it. It sucks. I feel sorry for you. But like you are like you are trying to elicit like sympathy from strangers. Like and frankly like it is such a negative correlation. It's such a negative indicator of your skill set. Because if you were good, like why would you be begging? Like I don't know. I know that's gonna offend people, but at the end of the day, like I don't feel too much sympathy in general for salespeople. And the reason I don't feel that much sympathy is the average American person makes about $50,000 a year. The average American family makes $70,000 a year. In cities like New York and San Francisco, that number's a little bit higher. Might be 90, it might be 100K. But making 180K, 220K in your late 20s is like a top 5% outcome. You need to remember that. Like if you are making 4x what the average person at your age makes, then you don't get to make excuses. You get paid too much for that.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying. I was wondering if you meant like reaching out to people and be like, please take a call with me or but that's even a step above of just, posting on
I think like asking people
timeline.
to take a call, like that's fine, but you have to like what's in it for them? Like if they're actively hiring, but again, you need to make yourself seen as desirable. Give me some statistics or give me something that's that's I can kind of pick up as juicy. I had a guy reach out to me last week with exactly that. And I looked at his background and he had really good quota attainment and it worked for some really small companies I'd never heard of. I thought, great, that's the kind of guy that you can go and put at an early stage company. I'll take that call. I think the final thing I will say about this as well, which again is something that people don't want to hear, but just because you have inflated your lifestyle expenses, it's not everyone else's problem.
Yeah.
And look, I'm in New York. Like I feel like I spend a gargantuan amount of money every time I breathe in. Frankly, it is not a cheap place to live. But that is not my customer's problem. That is my problem. And I think you need to remember that. Just in general, everyone needs to remember that. Have I frozen
Oh
again?
man, you did. You did. We almost made it.
Another rant.
Yeah. Yeah, it's every time the passionate rants start. But yeah, no, I 100% agree. You can't inflate your lifestyle and then expect like, I deserve a job in New York City that pays me this amount, right?
Yeah, I think like you can inflate your lifestyle as much as you want, but it's just remember it's your problem. It's your choice.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, sweet. This was awesome. Anything else you want to leave us with here?
Um, I think two things. If you are a sales rep, I'm going to have a course coming out in the next few weeks
Mhm.
that's going to cover a lot of this. It's going to go into detail. It's going to have stuff for every level. So people who are entry level, mid level, more senior level. I really just want to share a lot of what I've learned and make it as accessible as possible. So if you jump on my profile, probably by the time this goes live, that will be around. Twitter's the best way to find me. If you are a startup and you want help recruiting great salespeople, that is what I do. Please don't hesitate. We can have a conversation.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Sam. And yeah, this was a lot of fun. We gotta get you back on here, and this will go live in the follow up tomorrow. We just hit 10,000 subscribers, so
Hell yeah! All
we're
right,
moving
course will
quick.
be like it's a couple weeks away. I'm
Yeah, yeah.
working on it, but it will be worth it. I can promise you that.
Perfect. All right. Thanks, Sam.
Hey, thank you so much.
Well,